Hello Isopod fans, this is Wally with Supreme Isopods. I tell you what, we are really getting a huge response from these Isopod setup reviews that we're doing. Both from people submitting a short video on their Isopod setup so that we can do the review, and from people that have replied back to me saying that they're getting so much out of this segment. And that's exactly why we're doing it, to help the individual keeper that's submitting these videos and to help you as the average Isopod keeper. We have another video for you today, so stick around and let's get to it.
The Isopod vlog.
So let's just take a moment and talk about the purpose of these Isopod setup reviews. If you, as the average hobbyist, submit a video to me that's about a minute long, talk about what isopods you're keeping, how long the setup has been established, talk about the substrate, the materials that you're using in the Isopod setup like leaves and wood. Talk about what you're feeding your isopods and let me know of any issues that you're having with the Isopod setup, or if you just want me to review the setup. Send that video to me, and again, it should be about a minute long. I'll take the video and I'll review it for any fine tuning to help you keep your isopods better and maybe get better breeding results. One thing that you'll find in these reviews is that it's going to be very constructive. There is no criticism. We're all out to learn as much as we can about these isopods, their care, and how to better breed them. So let's take a look at our Isopod setup to be reviewed today. Okay, we're going to check out an Isopod setup submitted by Beansie. Let's go ahead and take a look. Love the music. Beansie also has a channel on YouTube. Make sure that you go over there and subscribe to her. Check out her videos. She does a great job. Thanks for the shout out, Beansie. Really appreciate that. It's extremely difficult to keep it under 1 minute. We're going to hold it right there for a second. Thank you again for the shout out. Appreciate it. Hope other people visit your channel and watch a few of your videos. Wonderful job. Absolutely hard to keep it under 1 minute. I wanted to point out here before we get much further, somebody already went on to this video and did a review, and there's a couple of things that I wanted to mention from that review, but we'll check that out at the end of this video. So stay tuned to the end. A little controversial, but we'll talk through it. Let's get back into it.
Hey Wally, Beansie here. This is my Armadillidium maculatum setup. As you can see, I've got plenty of air holes. We've got a feed dish in there, some wet moisture, or excuse me, sphagnum moss. We've got plenty of wood, wicker balls. Leaves are oak and Indian almond leaves. The substrate is primarily forest compost, but we've got some aquarium red clay gravel in there, as well as some crushed.
Stop it right there. That's 20 seconds, and Beansie went into a lot of information there, and there's also a lot of information on this Isopod setup that a lot of people might not be seeing, and we're going to talk about that right now. First of all, the ventilation. I don't see the top of the tub. I'm assuming that there's some ventilation holes in the top of the tub. If there are, that's great. If not, you probably want to put some air hole ventilation in the top. Otherwise, the ventilation looks really good. Moisture. I see there's a pile of sphagnum moss. I'd like to see a little bit more of this sphagnum moss and probably covering the whole width of the enclosure. But it looks good so far. And one of the hardest things to do when I'm reviewing these Isopod setups is to determine how much moisture is in the sphagnum moss, if there's moisture in the substrate as well. If you have moisture in the substrate, not wet, but fairly moist, that's really good. And for zebra isopods, I like to have at least 20 to 30% of the enclosure covered by that sphagnum moss so that they're getting that moisture and the babies get the moisture as well. For the leaves, I think you mentioned that you're adding leaves. I'm hoping that you added about 5 times as many leaves. You really want to put a lot of leaves in a setup like this. And you'll know if those are good leaves because in a couple of weeks you should start seeing some of the leaves being eaten. If you don't see some of the leaves being eaten, take them out and add a different type. Again, I suggest a really good hardwood leaf like oak or maple. The substrate, and this is what people might, just kind of going down a little bit here so I can see the video. The substrate, and this might be where some people might not see this, but it looks like you have about 1 inch of substrate. You really want to have about at least 2 inches, maybe 3 to 4 inches. If you don't have 3 or 4 inches in the for your substrate in this enclosure, you want to make sure that you're about to that depth. The wood is really good. We'll talk more about the wood later. It's a good hiding wood. The zebras will love to get up into that wood and hide, but we'll talk about a different type of wood structure in just a moment. Let's go ahead and get back into the video.
Coral for their calcium intake. For their food, I usually feed them a Repashy blend of bug burger and morningwood, and then I add some spirulina bloodworms and bee pollen in it, usually, sometimes a little calcium powder. We are having babies, but you know, not as many I don't think as I would like. So any advice you might have on helping me increase wet end, dry end, cholla wood, travel through, any advice you might have would be really great. Thanks, Wally. This has been really fun.
This has been really fun for me too. I'm glad people are enjoying doing these submissions. It's just been a blast for me. I love seeing these enclosures. I love helping people out, obviously, and the response that I'm getting so far is that it's helping other people, the viewers, with their isopod keeping as well. So it's a win-win-win situation, and that's just great. From the isopod setup, let's talk about food for just a second. It sounds like you're using a lot of great foods, a lot of variety. Perfect. Bug burger, morning wood, really good foods. There's certainly a lot of value in those foods, and some of the things that you're adding to those foods is really, really good. You are adding calcium, and for me personally, I like to have a side pile of calcium, either cuttlebone or eggshells or calcium carbonate for human consumption, over on a pile, a little mound of calcium, so I can manage how much calcium the isopods are actually taking in. If you mix it with the food, you're not sure if they're getting enough or not. If you have a pile of it, you certainly know when it goes down, and you can replenish that pile of calcium. The wood is great, like I mentioned before. The wicker balls and the cholla wood, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, look really, really cool in this setup. And here's the thing, do what you feel, as long as the isopods are being cared correctly for, and you certainly are in this setup, do what you want to do with the setups to make them attractive and so you can enjoy them as much as possible. The thing that I would do different is I would have a piece of cork bark or a piece of bark that you collect from the wild and sterilize, obviously, that has a little bit of a concave look to it. Put that over the dry area and the moist area, and that will allow the isopods to travel both from the dry and the moist area, so they can self-regulate how much moisture that they actually are getting. That also, having that wood like that over the moist area, keeps in that moisture and hydrates the isopods. If they don't want that moisture, that hydration, if they don't want it that humid, they can travel over to the dry area as well. Otherwise, this looks really, really good. In summary, I would say that this isopod setup is a yellow. That doesn't mean there's any issues with it. That just means, again, if you remember from the beginning, yellow simply means that you're not going to get the maximum number of babies that you possibly could. Some of the minor changes that I would provide for this setup is to provide the calcium in a separate clump, just so that you can manage it a little bit better. More leaves, and I think that you mentioned that you were adding additional leaves, and make sure that you have ventilation on the top. Some of the changes that you want to provide for this setup so that you maximize the number of babies, if that's what you want, if that's your goal, is to have a larger moist area Looking at this setup again, it looks like you have maybe a corner of the setup as the moist area. I would extend it all the way to the width of the whole setup so that they have plenty of area to go for moisture. Have that piece of wood, the cork bark or piece from the wild, covering more of the dry and more of the moist area, and have it extended over both, obviously. Make that substrate a little bit deeper. I would go at least 3 inches. And you can do that by adding a little bit of a substrate every 3 days till you reach that depth of about 3 to 4 inches. And one thing that, and this is might be a little controversial, but one thing that I would do is I would provide the food on the substrate. A lot of people use dishes. I like to put the food right on the substrate. And the reason I do that is so that the babies can go right to the food to go ahead and feed instead of finding it in a dish. I think a lot of people use the dish simply to keep the food off the substrate so the food doesn't mold in the substrate, but here's a huge suggestion. Incorporate springtails into the setup to take care of any excess food issues that you might have. If you provide the food on the surface of the substrate, those babies will find that food and just be happy as can be. I just don't like to give any excuses whatsoever for those babies to not find the things that they need to be very, very healthy. So Beansie was fortunate enough to have another person review the Isopod setup review video that she put on YouTube, and that person put in a lot of well thought out comments, and I just wanted to touch base on that just real quick. The one concern that I really have about this review is that it's actually based on other YouTube creators' videos. And 2 of the creators, and I'll just check it I'll read them off real quick here. Serpent Designs and Afro Herpers really don't keep a large number of isopods and don't spend the time with their isopods like some other larger breeders. You mentioned Aquarimax Pets in here. And absolutely, Russ is a great keeper and has lots of different isopod cultures going and does great videos. If you have a chance, if you haven't already, go to Aquarimax Pets and make sure that you watch his videos. Great information. There's some comments in here, and you really, again, if this person is relying on their review comments to be from other keepers, you really want to take this with a grain of salt. There's a couple of points in here like using twigs and pine needles and wood shaving chips and coconut husk fiber that really aren't good suggestions. And I would strongly suggest, if you don't have a lot of experience, if a person giving a review doesn't have a lot of experience in what they're doing, that they probably should refer to specific comments from other keepers. And as a person watching or reading this review, you can take it and compare it to other notes of other keepers that are keeping lots and lots of animals. Find 2 or 3 mentors, get information from them, compare their notes, make sure it makes sense to you, and use your judgment to make the best decision that you can. Beansie, I hope this review was helpful for you. I hope it's helpful for other keepers as well. Thank you very, very much again for doing the submission. I really appreciate it. If you liked this video, if everyone could hit that like below. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe. Hit that notification all so you don't miss another one of these videos. Thanks for watching, everybody.